All right, let me just make sure everything's working properly. All right, we're good. Wanted to get a video out for this card, but unfortunately, just a series of difficulties made that impossible. So we're going to do a live stream instead. Reminder, this card takes place tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, I think is when it starts. So make sure to get your lineups in before then if you are playing. 13 fight card, UFC 308 Abu Dhabi. I'm really excited for this fight card. We got 2 5-round fights and the headliner of Topuria versus Holloway for the featherweight belt. I want to start off with the mid-range here. This Abus Magomedov versus Ferreira, Nardiev versus Silva, and Aslan versus Rafael. I think all three fights are elite targets. We'll start off with the Silva fight. You have Nardiev with a bit of line value and a decent ITD line. I mean, plus 150, plus takedown upside. Looks like an extremely strong play. And then Bruno Silva plus 275 ITD. That's honestly not great on paper, but it's good enough. And I did look at ownerships, and I got to be careful with being like too exact about this. But I'll say Bruno Silva's sub 20% owned, and by a decent margin. I think that's pretty ridiculous. I think Bruno Silva makes the optimal lineup way more often than he's getting owned this week. So extremely strong leverage, in my opinion, on the Bruno Silva side. Nardiev side, definitely very good as well. The next fight out of that range, we'll go to Abus versus Ferreira. Another very strong fight, 1.5 round line. Both guys have great finishing lines, obviously. Abus with the takedown upside as well. Just another fight. I think you got to get to both sides of this. And I guess Abus is probably the better overall play just because he does have the takedown upside, which means that if the fight does get extended, I don't think he'll completely flop. Whereas, if Bruno Ferreira somehow won a decision, I think that doesn't really score that well. And then last but not least, right in the mid-range, Aslan versus Rafael. 55-45 in terms of the win probability. Rafael getting a slight favorite here. Touch of line value on the Rafael side. 1.5 round line once again. Great fight. So I think all three of these fights are just, they look phenomenal on paper. Now, they are all middleweight and light heavyweight fights, I believe. Let me just take a look at so yeah, Ferreira middleweight, so that fight's a middleweight fight. Middleweight for this, and then the Abus fight is middleweight. Or we already looked at what's the Ibo Aslan? 205, yeah. So they are all relatively heavier weight class fights, which means that they could carry significant downside if they don't finish. We talk about this a lot, so be aware of that. The downside is there, but the upside is just, it looks too good to pass up. I think you can get a bunch of combinations of these three fights, and I'm going to definitely be getting a lot of that in all of my builds. Then I want to move on to the wrestlers. So you have Renat Fakhretdinov and Orolbai as the two main wrestlers of the slate. Both of them carry extreme upside. Orolbai, he's been 100 plus in all of his wins thus far. Renat, pretty much the same thing. So both of them are extremely strong. And then we'll move on finally to the main and co-main event. We'll start off with the main event. Ilia Topuria, Max Holloway. So Max Holloway, it's hard to see if he wins. It's really hard to see him not being optimal. 7.4K. His wins are going to come with volume upside. They're going to come probably in 5 rounds. And I think it'll be enough to get there almost every time he wins. The problem is he's not winning all that often. He's about 30% or so to win. And another thing I want to mention, I looked at ownerships. He's He's higher than 30%. He's too high for my liking. Now, in a vacuum, right? If we were playing based on the market, we'd want to have Max Holloway 30% owned because that's how often he's winning the fight. But that's not always how it works, right? Like when you get to lineup construction, things aren't always perfect with how often someone's optimal and how often you have them in your lineup. So I do get that. But for me personally, I think it's a touch over-owned. And, I'm just not a fan of the Max Holloway play this week. I do think Ilya wins. I think this line is probably about right. But if Max Holloway is going to come in around 40% owned, I just don't want to have a lot of it. I want to be under on that for sure. So I think I'll be around, 28%, 30% max. I don't want to get any higher than that. And that's Topuria. Great play on paper. He can score in 5 rounds with the combination of striking and grappling. And he has significant knockout upside. Pretty much a lot of the finishing upside in this fight. The only thing I would be concerned about with him, if you get this like round 2 KO, you get the 94, there's a chance that the guys around him can outscore him. Renat, Chimaev, Abus, Oralby. He could get outscored, and it could be one of those things where he misses the optimal by just a bit, and you get a way lower owned lineup not having Topuria in it, right? So I think that's in play. Saberson will probably do a lot of that calculation for you. If I had to guess, in Topuria's wins, how often is he not optimal? Probably like 10, 15%. It's not likely, but it's certainly something. If you're getting to it naturally, I wouldn't really adjust that. I think that's fine. Chimaev, Whitaker, another great target. Chimaev, takedown upside, finishing upside, ground and pound. He really puts up great DFS scores. Now, he is the highest owned player on the slate. He's above 50%, which is a lot of ownership, but it's for good reason. It's for good reason. You look at him, he's minus 220. Like I said, he has a lot of finishing upside early and with takedowns. So I get it. And then Whitaker on the other side, it's one of those things where if Whitaker wins, it's probably optimal with the combination of the 5 rounds and the leverage you'll get against Chimaev. If we take a look at Whitaker here, he's not the highest upside guy. Like, even if he wins a 5-round decision, I will say I'm not 100% positive that he can put up 100 plus, because he just let's look at his win versus Darren Till. Yeah, 88, and that was a 5-round striking bout where he even got a couple takedowns. So in general, he's not a high upside guy, but I think the combination of the leverage and the 5 rounds makes him just good enough to play. But he's another guy that I want to have like 20% of. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the Whitaker play. I'd much rather play a lot of Chimaev. No hot take, obviously, but yeah, I think Whitaker 20% for me is probably going to be where I end up. And then we'll just go through the other fights, the high-priced guys. So Kennedy, 9.7K. It's a very tough price tag on a 13-fight card. What's his round 1 line, right? Plus 165. I mean, you really want like minus 110 at least. So he already doesn't have that good of a chance to finish in round 1 relative to his salary. And then you add on the fact that it's a 13-fight card. I think this Kennedy play is very fringy. Chris Barnett on the other side. The thing with him, he's not winning that often. He's minimum price. He's a punt play in MME, because if he wins, I'm pretty sure it's going to be by knockout. I don't see Chris Barnett winning a decision. You can see his ITD line is pretty similar to his win odds. So yeah, you can play 2 to 5% Chris Barnett if you're playing 150. And then the next spend up, Farid Basharat, Victor Hugo. Farid Basharat, another guy. I don't think he's making that good of value at 9.6K. He's not going to have a good finishing line, plus 185. He can wrestle, but it's more of like the technical. Like he's very smart when he fights. Like he's a guy that you want to back because he fights very smart. He fights point striking, stays on the outside, shoots his takedowns to seal rounds, and that'll get you an 85, 90 point decision on a median basis, which is not what you want at 9.6K. So I think Farid Basharai, extremely weak play. He has takedown upside, but once again, it's not really the kind you want, especially at this price with the lack of a finishing upside. Victor Hugo, I think he's another guy like Chris Barnett. You can punt him in the MME. If he wins this fight, it's probably by some weird type of submission. So maybe 2 to 5% Victor Hugo. Next fight, Ankalaev, Rakic. Ankalaev is just historically has been where fantasy points go to die. It's just been what it is with him. You just look through his fights. 96 with a round 2 KO. Okay. Against Johnny Walker, like draw 84 in a 5-round fight. Santos 5-round fight 80. He's scoring like 85-ish. And that's not going to be enough at 9.4K. Do his metrics argue otherwise? I don't think so. Yeah, plus 185. That's not great. He has takedown upside. I say it's like upside in the purest sense. Like it's there, but he doesn't really go to it. I mean, look at it. Yeah, he just doesn't shoot takedowns that often. And he said on interviews this week that the UFC told him if he wants to get a title shot, he has to make this fight a fun fight or a dominant fight or something along those lines. And what it sounded like to me is they don't want him to be boring. They don't want him to be a wrestler. So maybe you could buy into that and say that he'll be more aggressive going for the KO. That's certainly possible. But, I mean, again, a lot of that's probably priced in. So I think Ankalaev, yeah, I mean, I'm going to play him. But not very excited about it. Rakic on the other side, I don't think you'll get any good leverage against Ankalaev. 6.8K. I don't think he has that same finish only win condition that I think Hugo and Barnett have. So I'm not sure if Rakic wins. I'm not sure that it'll be optimal. I'm not sure that it'll score that well. So Rakic just an extremely weak play. Jeff Neal, RDA. RDA, I think, is a very solid underdog this slate, especially for like a low risk single entry type of contest. For starters, he's not really he doesn't meet the criteria of a punt because he is winning. He's plus 250 to win. That's very reasonable at 7K. And he has a grappling upside. Like if RDA wins, I think it'll come with some grappling success. And the other part of it is Jeff Neal he's gonna finish 40% of the time. So you can also you're somewhat likely to get a good floor out of RDA in a loss as well for that low risk kind of stuff. So I think RDA is a great play. MME, low risk, cash. I think all contests. He's a guy that I really like this week. And then Jeff Neal, I'd probably cap him at his round 1 KO odds. I think that's the only way he's really getting there is with an early KO. So plus 400, yeah, you want to cap him there for how much you get of him. I think that's reasonable. Or Oralbai's opponent, Rebecki. So Rebecki, I think, is going to be a really good underdog here. He's plus 260. Sure. Not bad. And his IATD line is plus 350. Reasonable enough to play. 7.1K. He has a bit of takedown upside himself. Now, he's fighting a really good wrestler in Oralbai. But, right, if we're assuming Rebecki wins and gets his way, there could be some takedowns of his own with his wins. So, Rebecki, I think, is a great underdog. Carlos Leal versus he's going against Renat Vakhridinov. Carlos Leal, reasonable money line. And I guess semi-decent finishing line. Just good enough. So, yeah, Leal, sure. Leal I'll take as a pretty good underdog here. Dan Ige, Lerone Murphy. This fight looks like pretty much as close to a pass as you can get. Lerone Murphy, another one of these guys. He's a technical guy, good fighter, but he doesn't really have the fantasy upside that you want. Non-existent ITD line, plus 400. Dan Ige, also a pretty terrible ITD line. I don't think you'll be getting leverage on Lerone, so like you're not getting that leverage playing Ige. I think, and then you also look at all of these guys around Lerone Murphy, Orobai, Fakardinov, Toporich, like it's just hard for me to see Lerone making it into the optimal by outscoring all of these guys around him. So I think that's a very tough play to make. Lerone Murphy, definitely MME only. Dan Ige, yeah, same kind of thing. MME only. I don't really have a lot of interest there. And then last but not least, Armin Petrosian, Shara Magomedov. So both of these guys come from a kickboxing background. And what I've been doing in these types of fights recently is I just want to know who has the hint of takedown upside. And in this matchup, you might think that it's Magomedov because of the last name, but it's not. It's actually Petrosian. Magomedov is actually very anti-grappling. He always talks about how grappling is and wrestling is like a coward's way to fight, all this kind of stuff. So if there's anyone that's going to be shooting takedowns, I do think it'll be Armin Petrosian. Now, can you count on it? No, he shot like one takedown in his career. I don't think it's likely, but it is possible. And Shara does not have good takedown defense. So if Petrosian does decide to do that and it does work, there could be some sneaky upside here on this Petrosian play. 7.6K. Both guys have lackluster ITD lines. Petrosian, he's an underdog. That's reasonable. Yeah, plus 155. And he has a hint of takedown upside. I think Petrosian's the preferred side here for me. Magomedov, pure striker, bad ITD line. I will give him, he does have high volume, but that's not going to be enough, I don't think, on a card like this. So Magomedov, an extremely weak play. So yeah, that's just the overall breakdown. Last thing I want to talk about is fight stack 1%, one lineup out of 150. If you're doing 150, do the Topuria and Holloway fight and play it in one fight stack. I think it's very rare for it to get there, but you get an iteration of this card that plays out where no underdogs win. It's possible. We saw it the other week with Tatsuro Taira, Brandon Roybal. The fight stack on that card was, I went back and checked. It was like, I think it was 3 to 5 points away from being the optimal. So these iterations do happen. And I think it's important to at least set yourself up with a little bit of a chance when they do. And so for that reason, one lineup, Topuria Holloway stack, I think is fine. It's pretty late, so I don't think anyone will be in here, but I'll check if there's any questions real quick. Oh, PhD's in here. Dodgers killing me. Gonna have to watch later. Usual fight stack. Yeah, so 13 fights, a lot of upside to be had. I think it's extremely unlikely that a fight stack gets there. Like I just said, I think one lineup. If you want to do that, I think it's fair. But besides that, I don't love it this week. Is there any other things to talk about, really? Yeah, no, I guess my overall theme of the slate is that this high 9K range does not look strong on paper. Kennedy, decent metrics, but not for this high of a price. Fareed, pretty bad metrics. Ankalaev, same thing. Jeff Neal. Like, these four do not look good, honestly. So, like, you can even look at, like, the mid-range right here, this Abus, Nardiev, Aslan. These three fights have more finishing upside than these three guys up here at the top. These four guys, Jeff Neal included. So I think that's where I'm going to really hammer this week is this mid-range. And, if the fights don't end up panning out, it is what it is. But I think I want to get over the field on a lot of these guys here. And I will. This is a week. I know last week, 11 fight card. I didn't X anyone out. This week, I definitely I will be playing a bit more aggressive here, and I will be crossing out some fighters. I'm not really sure who exactly. I got to after the stream. I got to rebuild and everything. But I am going to get fairly aggressive here on a 13 fight card. Is there anything else to really talk? I just want to think. Okay. Yes. As far as the ownerships that I looked over, I think Bruno Silva is criminally underowned relative to his metrics and leverage that he'll provide against his opponent. I think that Holloway's a touch overowned. I think that Whitaker's probably fairly owned, maybe a bit underowned, to be honest. He came in pretty low, around 20%. The rest, I think everything looked pretty normal to me. Chimaev, highest owned fighter on the slate, but for good reason. Oral bind or not, both reasonable ownership, and I think they're both very strong plays. So definitely chalk, not even chalk, definitely plays that I want to be on, especially at the moderate ownership. And yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah. Mindful MMA. Yeah, if you have any questions, let me know, dude. But yeah, I think that's all I really got. Unless I'll wait a couple more minutes if anyone has any more questions here. But I think I've said everything that I want to do on this slate. And if you have any questions, definitely leave a comment, and I'd be happy to answer it. And I guess I'll just go with my opinions on the fights a little bit as I wait for any last minute questions. I like both favorites. There's not much of a hot take for me this week. I do think Topuria is an elite fighter. Max is an elite fighter too, but I just think Topuria's a step ahead at this point in their careers. And I think Chimaev will finally get back in the win column here, or back in the hype column, because his fight pullouts and his kind of weird decision against Usman, a lot of the hype died down on him. But I think this is a really good spot for him to get an early finish and, become everyone's favorite fighter once again. So as far as prediction strike, I think Chimaev is a good target. He probably does have a high price because there is a lot of hype on him in general. But if it did die down, I think now is a good spot to get him. And I'm sure Topuria's hype is through the roof on prediction strike, so probably not much value there. Yeah, but I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you guys for watching, as always, and I will see you guys in the next one.